Perfect. Perfect.
All right, everybody, what's going on, man? How y'all doing? Welcome to today's edition of SWACTalk. Of course, this is the show we cover the SWAC inside and out, and I'm your tour guide around the SWAC. See what's coming at you. And today we're gonna do something a little. We're gonna take a look back at one of my favorite rivalries. Some people call it the Boombox Classic. I still call it Southern and Jackson State. Southern versus JSU, SU, JSU, Jackson State, Southern, whatever you want to call it. I call it that. I don't necessarily call it Boombox. I mean, I do from time to time, but to me, it's always going to be Southern versus Jackson State versus Southern. But anyway, I want to look back on this series and share my thoughts on this series from being around it, being in it, and kind of just touch on it a little bit. So before we do that, man, why don't y'all go ahead and hit those socials. Facebook is SWACTalk, Instagram, SWACTalk, Twitter, SWACTalk76. Also, if you would love to support the show and help us kind of keep the lights on, so to speak, you could hit the Patreon, patreon.com/SWACTalk. And with a $3 level, gives you access to members-only group chat and ability to suggest topics for SWAC Talk and SWAC Smoke. Also, we have a $5 level that gives you those perks and gives you an opportunity to be a part of a live members live roundtable on SWAC Smoke at the end of the month. Also, we're going to be doing pick'em contests and trying to put together an HBCU poll to do during the season. So all that stuff is going to be going on the Patreon. So patreon.com/SWACTalk. Hit that up. Also hit that subscription button. We making our way over 900. We at almost at 925, about to get that 1K. Thank y'all very much for subscribing. If you haven't done so already, want to hit that button. Also hit that notification bell to be alerted to videos that I drop. And feel free to comment on the video. Let me know what your thoughts is on the Boombox Classic on Southern Jackson State, whatever you want to call it. That's what it is. So let's go ahead and jump knee deep into this thing, man. This is a rivalry, man, that goes back for years. I mean, obviously, these two teams have been in the SWAC together for a long time, and they this is a spirited rivalry, man. And I know from my point of view, being a Southern fan, Jackson State was always a big game, even though back in my heyday coming up, my growing up years in the 80s, we never stood a chance against Jackson State. So it was one of those things where we wanted to beat them really bad, and I'm sure they probably didn't even care that much because they were stomping Southern for a while back in the 80s. So to me, it was one of those things where it was a little one-sided, and then Southern was able to start to right the ship. But this to me is probably one of, if not the most intense rivalry in football. I mean, these two teams are from different states, obviously. They mirror each other a lot. Both teams are from capitals of their state. Both teams have very rabid, very loyal, very loud, and very boisterous fan bases. So this is one of those things where these two teams, when they meet up, it's a lot of trash talking. It's a lot of fun. And more often than not, in recent history, a lot of very successful teams played against each other. Just to kind of look through some of the numbers from back in the day, and I started in the 70s because that's basically when I was born. I was born in 76, so I just started at the period of time that I got into this. Jackson State won the series. I guess you could say they won the 70s with a 6-4 record between the two teams. They also dominated the 80s. Like I said, they were 9-2 against Southern in the 80s. Southern had their first winning decade against Jackson State, going 7-4 in the 90s. In the 2000s, Jackson State won that 6-4. And then in the 10s, Southern won 8-3. And obviously right now, Jackson State leads the 20s 3-1 with a 3-game winning streak. So, you know, it's a lot on the line when these two teams meet up this season. Southern had an 8-game winning streak when Jackson State was on their downward trend for a little while from 13-21. Almost had a 10-game streak if they would have won that first matchup in 13. Could have had a 10-game streak, but ifs and fifths, you know, all of that. It don't really go. It don't really count. Jackson State longest streak was 7 from 77 to 83. These two teams first met in 1929. Southern put up a big score in that game, 98-0, and then these two teams wouldn't play again until 58 when Jackson State won. I mean, when Jackson State joined the SWAC. So from 58 to now, these two teams have been playing. The series is 37-32. So right now, like I said, right now JSU's on a 3-game winning streak, and they won their last 2 matchups very handily. So looking at some of the games, just kind of roughly looking at some of these games, from my perspective, the first game that stand out to me is October 16, 1976. Southern won that game 20-6. The game was not that important, but I was born like 2 days before that game on a Thursday. So my family always said that Jackson State Southern was like my birthday. You know, a lot of times the games fell either before or just shortly after my birthday. So it was always a special thing for me, you know, to see Southern and Jackson, because they always tended to play in the middle of October. Honestly, till like 1999, they played pretty much from the, you know, pretty much in the middle of November. So it kind of was like that Tennessee, Alabama third Saturday of every October. You know, these two teams meet up in the middle of October. We got away from that for a couple years. Then it went back to that. Then it started moving all around date-wise. A couple of November matchups the last few years. So it's kind of been bouncing around. But that's the first game that stands out to me because, you know, my family always talks about that game. I have obviously no real recognition of that game. But my biggest memory from Jackson State Southern was 97, 81, 83, and 87. Southern got shut out by Jackson State. So that was 4 years of my formative life that I had to go to Jackson and watch Jackson shut Southern out. And then I was in Jackson this past season to watch Southern get shut out. So maybe I shouldn't go to Jackson and then Southern to score some points. But so those 80s, those late 70s and early 80s, man, Jackson State was a machine. 8 out of 11 championships. They, you know, hadn't lost a game for like 3.5, 4 years. They were a serious problem for everybody. And Southern just, you know, Southern never really matched up with them in Jackson and Baton Rouge. The games were a lot closer. In the 80s, Southern lost 7-6 at home, 17-10, 30. They beat Jackson State 84, 34-28. They lost 16-9 at home, and they lost 23-3 at home. So the games were a little bit closer in Baton Rouge. Some people say, you know, some people always say strange things happen at Southern, and maybe that's true. 1990 is the Jimmy Smith year. Him and Jackson State came down and put a 50-piece on Southern. And Aeneas Williams, that was one game that always stands out. The 89 game was a very, I mean, if you're a Southern fan, it was a special day. It was Jackson State homecoming, and, you know, we were able to beat them. I think that game was on BET, beat them 21-7. to snap to snap a 4-game streak to them, and basically win only our second game of the '80s against Jackson State, and our first game in Jackson that we won since 1975. So a lot of futility in that realm right there, man. Just watching Jackson State kind of run through. 93, the tide started to change a little bit when Pete Richardson came into Southern. Southern would actually go on to win I think 6 out of the 10 games. Win 7 out of the 11 games that they played in the 90s. A lot of great games in that time span, though. These two teams were basically battling it out for SWAC championship at this point. Jackson State was going to the playoffs pretty much almost every year during that period. The 95 game was a pretty great game in Jackson with 16-14. The 96 game, I think it was the 98 game, I think it was a very controversial game. That was the game that, if you know anybody that's old school, you ask them about it. The clock went out. Some people say Southern turned the clock off, but the clock didn't work for the bulk of the game. And, Southern was able to win that game 33-28 at home. So that led to a lot of people saying Southern is pretty shady at home. To this day, I don't know, but I'm gonna stick with the clock went out because we got the dub that we needed. 99 was a special year. 2 matchups that year. One in Jackson, Southern won 26-14. 31-30 rematch in the first ever SWAC championship game is always going to be a very special game to me. I was at that game, and like I said, that was the first SWAC championship game. Nobody knew how long this would last, but they got what they wanted. They got Southern against Jackson and a big crowd in Birmingham, and these two teams wouldn't play again in the championship till 2013. So, it wasn't so much at that time that neither team was good. Both teams were pretty solid, but there were just a couple Bama teams in there at that point. Grambling was in there, so it was really tough to get a foothold. But in 2000, 2002, and 2004, the game moved to New Orleans, and Jackson State actually won 2 out of those 3. I was never really a fan of that, and not because Robert Kent told Southern a new asshole in the dome, but it was just I never personally felt like the atmosphere was the same. I actually went to that first matchup that Jackson State won 13-10 in 2000. And then I was living in Florida later, so I didn't make those games. But to me, the atmosphere just didn't really. To me, it just didn't really feel the same. And the later portion of that, Jackson State was going through their James Bell years, so a lot of kind of upside down things for them. Jackson State would win 2 games in a row in 06 and 07. Southern would pick up a victory in 08, and then Jackson State would rip off 3 in a row from 2009, 2010, and 2011. We're gonna come back to that 2010 game in a minute. That was a very crazy game. 2013 was the second time these two teams played twice. Jackson State beat Southern in Baton Rouge in that game, 19-14, and then Southern would win the rematch in Houston, and that would be the start of Southern ripping off those 8 games in a row. Including the spring, which you can count the spring or not count it, but that was 8 game in a row stretch. And then now Jackson State has taken over in recent matchups, winning 3 in a row, including a 35-0 beatdown last season in the Vet, and then a 43-24 SWAC championship game victory, which to me wasn't as close as the score looks. The 2021 game was a pretty entertaining game. I wouldn't necessarily say it was a classic type game because Southern really wasn't a great team, and Jackson State was still, they were, pretty dominant that year. Southern was there to hang around and, keep themselves in the game, but Jackson State scored two 2 late touchdowns to win that game and sealed it on an interception. But it was one of those games that, you know, a typical Southern Jackson matchup. You get a lot of close games, you know, within 7 points of each other. Now there's a few beatdowns in there from time to time, but the majority of these games, when you look at some of the scores over time, you're looking at some games that are fairly close. You know, so these two teams typically match up pretty well. Now, when one team is up and the other one is down, you can kind of count on it not being pretty. But for the most part, I think both of these teams are kind of similar in most portions of this matchup, and that leads to some very entertaining games. Now, speaking of the 2010 game, I'm gonna do something a little different. I'm gonna actually have. I'm going to actually have the 2010 game playing the last 3 minutes, and I'm going to react to it. I haven't watched this game since that night that it happened. This was a very disappointing game if you're a Southern fan. A lot of highs and a lot of lows. But I'm going to actually go through this with y'all, man. So we're gonna start this up in a minute, and we're just gonna see what happens, man. This is my actual. I've never did a reaction to anything, but this is gonna be my first time actually watching this game in ever.
In 6 points. You know, this is it's under 3:30. It's about 3:10 remaining in the fourth quarter.
All right.
And the punt is off, and here goes what's the scariest sight for the Jackson State Tigers. Williams takes the punt back. It's a touchdown for Jackson.
Southern, with 2 minutes and 50 seconds left in the game, Southern returns a kickoff returns a punt for a touchdown to take a 38-34 lead. So
they're now up by 3.
And I tell you, what happened is we did maintain possession. This is where you got to hold on to the football. You got to treat it like it's your baby.
41 seconds. The handoff. Lee is in. Touchdown, Jackson State.
Oh, yes, indeed. Like the ball straight up the deck. These little fellows.
First and 10.
All right. 41 seconds. Jackson State punches it in from like the 1 or 2 yard line to take a 41-38 lead. Southern has the ball now. We're going to see what the Jaguars do. 29 seconds left.
Offense, led by the quarterback, McGinty. Jeremiah McGinty, who has had a pretty good game, 4 wideouts and 1 running back. McGinty, quick throw, slant. And the slant is complete. And Quad Cox is chasing the runner, and he scores a touchdown for the Southern Jaguars. 19 seconds to go. The Jaguars take back the lead.
19 seconds, Southern scores a touchdown, a long touchdown pass to take a 45-41 lead. And I want to say this is the birth of this moment. It may not be. It may have happened a couple years before, but Southern started playing Gangsta B and getting really crazy, and that led to something that happens quite often from then until now.
From the Tigers.
Southern tells Jackson State to go home with 19 seconds left in the game, leading by 4, 45-41.
To 45. Southern Jaguars have scored 45 points against a defense that is average an allowance of 18 points per game. Same formation. Carry up. Rose. Wilder scores a touchdown.
It still hurts, man. It still hurts. It still, oh my God, man. And then the Sonic Boom plays "Do What You Wanna." Oh my God. Man, I'm hurt. Yeah, like y'all don't understand, man. I'm seriously hurt right now, man. Like this is happening for real, man. Oh my God. So, and that's the Boombox Classic in a nutshell, man. That 2010 game, Southern was a huge underdog. Came in and looked like they were gonna win that game a couple of times. Jackson State stole that victory straight from Southern and put the dagger in their hearts. Got on Southern for prematurely celebrating and started to go home, which is pretty much a thing that happens quite often now in this series. You get to tell the opponent to go home at the end of the game. But I just wanted to share this with y'all, man, because this is one of my favorite rivalries. I can't wait to be in Mumford on September 9th for this matchup this season. Look forward to another great game between these two teams and heated rivals. And hopefully, you guys can let me know, which some of y'all favorite games in this series was. And, I hope y'all appreciate me putting myself through that pain because I haven't watched that game since I haven't really ever seen it. I think I may have seen that clip a couple of times, but I actually didn't get to go to that game, and I found out like checking ESPN or whatever, which hurts. It hurts even worse. So that's gonna do it for us today, man. I thank y'all for tuning in with us and rocking with us, and we'll be back with another edition of SWACTalk tomorrow. So we'll holler at y'all then. Peace.